Are UFOs and UAP real?
The truth is that we've never proved one, but there are things flying around up there that we haven't fully identified yet.
UFO and UAP have been here for a long time.
There's footage and records of objects in the skies that we don't know exactly what they are.
UFO and UAP are a global phenomena.
I won't talk to you about what I know about it, but it's very interesting. But Roswell's a very interesting place with a lot of people that would like to know what's going on.
These close encounters are categorized into 5 different categories. It's 10:30 in the evening on September 10th of 1954, and we're in Quarouble, France. We have a classic case of a close encounter of the third kind. Marius de Wilde, a railway guardian living close to the border with Belgium, lived in a house by the tracks close to the railway station. His dog started barking at 10:30 p.m. At first he ignored the dog, but eventually went outside with a flashlight to see what was going on. He walked towards the tracks and saw a disc-shaped craft about 20 feet away parked across the tracks. When he shined his flashlight on it, he saw 2 humanoid figures who were about 3 feet tall. They had little legs and no arms and were wearing what looked like black wetsuits. Their shiny heads reflected the light of his flashlight. Suddenly, a light beam shot out from the disc-shaped craft and left him paralyzed. He slowly looked back and saw a door opening on the craft. The beings boarded the object and it took off, changing its colors as it disappeared into the night sky. Soon after the craft was gone, he was able to move again and went back inside his house. He shared his story with his wife and neighbors, but none of them had seen or heard anything. He then called the local police, who sent some officers to his home. De Wilde could not approach the location where everything happened because it made him feel sick. Combined with his report that all battery-powered devices stopped working, this helped the officers feel that his story was not a hoax. Before sunrise, investigators were all over the place. During their nighttime investigation, a train came by and produced a very loud and unexpected noise, causing the conductor to bring the train to a stop. A 20-foot wide depression was found on the exact point where the object had landed and was immediately said to be the cause of the train's odd noise. The light of the day helped to uncover some more clues. The gravel on the train tracks was all carbonized where the circular impression was, and the wooded railroad ties that support the train tracks had some odd symmetrical markings on them. The incident was made famous by the local magazine called Radar. There were some after effects of this notable sighting. De Wilde suffered from some respiratory problems, and his dog died 3 days after the sighting. There were 3 classic cattle mutilation cases in nearby farms with blood drained and organs surgically removed. Several local people claimed sightings of objects and creatures similar to the ones witnessed by De Wilde. It's October 27th of 1954, and we're in Tuscany, Italy. We have a famous close encounter of the second kind that is also one of the world's largest mass sightings in broad daylight. It was a beautiful and crisp autumn day, and the mighty Fiorentina club was playing against its local rival, Pistoiese. 10,000 fans were filling the Stadio Artemi Franchi. Just after halftime, the stadium fell eerily silent, and the crowd started roaring and pointing at the sky. One of the players, Artico Magnini, said, "I remember everything from A to Z. It was something that looked like an egg that was moving slowly, slowly, slowly. Everyone was looking up, and also there was some glitter coming down from the sky, silver glitter. We were astonished. We had never seen anything like it before. We were absolutely shocked." A lifelong Fiorentina fan, Gigi Boni, said, "I remember clearly seeing this incredible sight. His description of multiple objects differs slightly from Magnini's. They were moving very fast, and then they just stopped. It all lasted a couple of minutes. I would like to describe them as being like Cuban cigars. They just reminded me of Cuban cigars in the way they looked." After many years of reflection, Boni said that, "I think they were extraterrestrial. That's what I believe, and there's no other explanation I can give myself." As the unknown craft passed over the stadium, a strange material reportedly began to fall from the sky, which they described as silver glitter, known by modern ufologists as angel's hair. The roofs of homes surrounding the stadium were covered in this unusual silvery white material, which evaporated after an hour. Witnesses described it as similar to spiderwebs or cottonwood. It was hard to collect as it disintegrated on contact, but despite this, some was collected and analyzed. Samples were collected and taken to the Institute of Chemical Analysis at the University of Florence, where Professor Giovanni Caneri subjected the material to spectrographic analysis. He concluded that it contained the elements boron, silicon, calcium, and magnesium, and that it was not radioactive. After the incident, many people claimed that the white material must have been from spiders' webs. The problem with that is that spiders' webs do not contain the chemical elements discovered by the lab work. It's 2 a.m. on November 29th of 1954, and we're in Caracas, Venezuela, where we have a close encounter of the third kind. Two men in their mid-20s, Gustavo Gonzalez and Jose Ponce, were driving to a pork butchery products wholesaler to stock up for the market, which opens at daybreak. As they approached the factory, they noticed that the entire street was illuminated, as in broad daylight, by a brilliant object hovering 3 feet above the road. They described this object as metallic or luminous sphere from 6 to 12 feet in diameter that hovered motionless above the street. The object had 2 windows in the sides, about 3 feet in diameter. On the top was a cupola. The men were surprised to see that the object hovered over the street without any support, such as wheels or landing gear of any kind. Gustavo stopped the van and both men got out, walked towards the craft, and stopped only 30 feet away from it. It was at this point that Gustavo encountered a 3-foot-tall humanoid. The being that stood in front of the sphere was covered with a stiff dark hair and had hands finished by 4 long claws. His head was round, or perhaps under a helmet, had no ears, nose, or mouth. Its 2 eyes were large, oval, shining, or reflecting the light of the headlights of the van like cat's eyes. He seemed not to wear any clothing except some sort of weird loincloth and looked barefoot. Gustavo felt like something was keeping him from moving, but walked up to the being and grabbed him between his arms. The being was very light, under 50 pounds, and Gustavo was able to lift him off the ground easily. The little humanoid was much stronger than Gustavo, though, and managed to break free of his grasp, giving him a brutal hit that sent Gustavo falling back to the ground. Gustavo tried to stand up, but felt a vibration in his body and felt like he was in a trance. The little humanoid then made a cat-like jump at Gustavo, who pulled out his scout knife and tried to stab him in the shoulder. Surprisingly, the blade did not penetrate and instead slipped away from the rhino-like skin of the humanoid. Gustavo noticed that the humanoid had webs between the claws that were now trying to grab him. 2 more of these strange humanoids arrived at the scene, and one held a bright lantern that blinded Gustavo for a few moments. When he could see again, he saw that all the humanoids had disappeared. During all of this, his partner, Jose Ponce, had seen one of these short humanoids climbing up the right slope of the road, holding what looked like stones or lumps of earth in his hands. As soon as the humanoid noticed Jose, it leaped 2 meters to an opening to the inside of the luminous sphere. It reappeared moments later with another being who held a long metallic shining tube, which he pointed at Gustavo and shot out a bright light that blinded him. The beings then went into the sphere and took off vertically at high speed without making any noise. Jose had had enough and ran towards a law enforcement station that was just a few blocks away. Gustavo arrived at the same station a few minutes later, exhausted and terrified. After having some water and calming down, he related the events to the treasurer of guard Manuel Moreno. Moreno indicated that Jose and Gustavo had arrived at 2:30 in the morning and were not drunk or crazy. He said their story was believable because what Jose and Gustavo told him was consistent and full of detail. Jose and Gustavo stayed for a while at the station, which was actually an office of the General Inspection of Transport. They noticed that neither of the men were drunk but were very nervous. Gustavo had bruises on his left side where he had tried to capture one of the little humanoids. Moreno said their story was believable because what Jose and Gustavo told him was consistent and full of detail. Jose and Gustavo stayed for a while at this station, which was actually an office of the General Inspector of Transport. Moreno spoke with the pork wholesaler and their director, Antonio Cerci. He said that he knew the 2 men by sight and that they were reliable, always coming at the right hour and not causing any problems. He felt that they were reliable people and was ready to believe their story. By midday, the press office of the General Command of the Police Forces of the town of Caracas announced that they had recorded the statements of the 2 men and that Major Jesus Antonio Yanez said that the event was something very unusual. The Caracas newspaper, El Universal, published their story that very same day, indicating that the 2 men must not have been drunkards or the police force would have mentioned it. Gustavo was sent to the doctor at 3 a.m. for a checkup. The medical personnel at the emergency station of Esquina de Sales noted bruises on the left side of his body and did an x-ray which showed no broken ribs. There were others who saw or heard something very unusual that same night. Miss Maria Antonieta Avellaneda reported that she was awoken sometime between 1 and 2 in the morning by the sound of an explosion, followed by a whistling sound, but she was busy making medicine for a sick child and did not pay much attention to it. Concepcion Garrachan, a resident of Petare, reported that hours before Jose and Gustavo had their encounter, she had seen a luminous craft flying over the town of Petare without making any noise. Several other people that were with her reported seeing the same thing. Later that evening, at 2 a.m., she heard an explosion in the direction of Jose and Gustavo's encounter with the little humanoids. Mr. Manuel Maria Soria was driving home at 2:30 in the morning, just a few blocks from Jose and Gustavo's encounter, and saw a bright light that illuminated his car and forced him to stop. He then heard a whistling sound, restarted his car, and drove home at full speed. When he got home, he told his mother Juanita Soria about what he had seen. She replied that she had also heard something, but thought it was one of the new planes acquired by the government. Dr. Julio Garces, laboratory assistant at Perez de Leon Hospital in Petare, stated that a little after 2 in the morning, while driving his car in the area, he heard cries of terror. He stopped to see what was happening but could not tell where the cries were coming from. Mrs. Elsa Duderstad stated that she was in her garden of her house when she saw a very intense light in the shape of a disc going up above Petare, changing color and hovering for several minutes. Her son Rodolfo Duderstad and her niece Ursula Wyde confirmed that they saw the same thing. The Quaroubles, who lived along the old railway to the populated part of Petare, indicated that at the time of Gustavos and Ponce's encounter, they observed a very brilliant light passing above their house, illuminating their rooms like a very intense star. Mrs. Avelina del Paso, a resident of Andres Bello Street, said that several police and national security patrols were in the area imposing order and searching in the streets of the houses for the origin of the explosion heard during the passing of that brilliant light. Francisco Leal from 7th Street felt the explosion like all the neighbors in the sector. Several families on the same street talked to the police force about a bluish and intense light accompanied by a strange noise. This is a very interesting multiple witness case that shows once again the phenomena is global and has been with us throughout time. It is around sunset on December 9th of 1954, and we are in Chico, Venezuela, with a close encounter of the third kind. Two boys, Lorenzo Flores, 15 years old, and Jesus Gomez, 16 years old, from a small village near Chico in Venezuela, were out hunting around sunset time. They had followed the Trans-Andean Highway until they found a good spot and headed into the bush, marking their trail very carefully. After a while, they found no game to shoot, so headed back to the highway. They sat down on the side of the road for a few minutes to rest and see if a car would come by to give them a ride into town. Looking down the road for lights, they saw one light off to the side of the road and in the bushes. The boys grabbed their new rifle and ran down the road towards the light in case it was somebody who needed help. The previous year, a bus had crashed in the same area and many people were hurt. When they got close to the area that was off the highway, they noticed that there were not any tire tracks leading out to the area in the bushes where the light was. Jesus said that maybe it was an airplane and they should go check it out. They pushed their way through the dense bushes to the source of the light and were shocked when they reached a clearing in the bush. Just 150 feet away, there was a 10-foot wide disc-shaped UFO hovering about 3 feet off the ground. It was a luminous glowing metallic gray in color and had orange flames coming out of the bottom. They watched it for several minutes in disbelief as they had never seen anything like it before. At that point, 5 small men, about 3 feet tall and covered in long dark hair, walked out from behind the craft and quickly headed towards the boys. They had big eyes, long arms and hands with 4 claw-tipped fingers. The boys then jumped up and ran back the way they had come through the bushes. Lorenzo heard Jesus trip and fall down behind him. The beings reached him quickly and began attacking him. Lorenzo turned around and headed back to help his friend. One of them had Jesus in a headlock while the others were holding on to his arms and legs. Jesus was not giving up and was thrashing hard in their grasp, landing several good kicks. One of the creatures was snarling, and Lorenzo could see a row of sharp teeth in its mouth. Lorenzo grabbed the arm of one of the closest to him and found it to be very muscular and strong, easily pushing him away. Then they ignored Lorenzo and started hauling Jesus towards their ship. Lorenzo ran back to where he had dropped his rifle and found it to be unloaded. He then went to the clearing and used it to smash one of the creatures in the head, breaking the rifle in half. The creature screamed in pain and dropped Jesus. The others followed suit and also let go of Jesus. Lorenzo threatened to hit them all with the barrel of the gun, which caused them to stop and confer amongst themselves soundlessly. They then turned and headed back towards the craft. Lorenzo tried to wake Jesus, who was slumped on the ground. Eventually, he moved his head and moaned. Jesus' face was scratched and both of their clothes were torn in several places. They heard a loud roaring sound and saw the strange craft lift up in the air, pause for a moment, and start glowing a brilliant white color. Then it took off at a very high rate of speed and was gone over the hills in just a moment. The boys then walked home to their worried parents, who called a local doctor after seeing their scratches and cuts. The boys insisted on their story about encountering these creatures and Jesus almost being kidnapped and seeing the strange luminous craft take off into the sky. The boys' parents were not convinced of their story, but the boys convinced them to come and see the area where they had the encounter. The doctor and a local policeman came with them to inspect the site in the bush. When they got there, there was a large patch of flattened grass, which was visible along with some drag marks that matched the description of Jesus being dragged off. Lorenzo's broken gun was also found, including its bent metal barrel. It's October 22nd of 1954. We're in Ranton, England, and we have a close encounter of the third kind with the tall Nordics.
Well, it was one ordinary day. I was waiting for my husband to come home from work, and my two sons went to Cypher to school, and I was getting changed, and I heard this terrific noise. It was just like a giant cauldron of water being poured onto a fire, a shh sort of noise, you know. And the first reaction was, oh, the children. I thought maybe a plane was crashing or something like that. And I slipped my jumper on and went outside to find my two sons lying flat on the ground in the garden in front of the house, shouting, "Mummy, Mummy, there's a flying saucer." Well, naturally, I just said, "Come on, don't be stupid. Come in the house." But felt sort of a strange sensation. Wended my way up the side of the house to where we had a pump where we used to get all our water from, and automatically looked up to see this, all I can describe, this huge Mexican hat. It was stationary, this thing, and it was bright silver in colour, and it had a dome. It was tilted to sort of, I could see the occupants in it.
You saw people in it?
I saw people in it. There were two people in there. These people were beautiful people. That's the only way I can describe them. They had long golden hair, like a page boy bob, just like the old kings. You used to see photographs of the old kings. And the colour of their hair was golden. Now, I was really...
What were they dressed in?
They had a sort of a polo-neck jumper affair, like a ski top suit, in pale blue. Now, these people weren't sat behind, one behind the other. They were sat together, but this, whatever it was tilted so that I could see them and they could see me.
Were you looking at them through windows, through portholes? Or
no, not portholes. It was just sort of like a cockpit, I suppose, but had this perspex or glass or whatever it was. They could see me anyway, and I could see them. And they had beautiful faces. I shall never forget their faces as long as I live. Their foreheads seemed to be a bit larger than, you know, the bottom of their faces as normal people you would expect to see. But maybe this was just whatever they had round their heads, which was like a transparent fishbowl. And they just looked. And I was absolutely paralytic with fear. I couldn't move, although my mind was ticking over. And they looked so sympathetic that I was just mesmerized for what seemed to be, ages, but it could have only been seconds. And I turned to sort of look down at the boys, was unaware that they were with me because I was so absorbed. And the next thing, I looked up and it was gone.
how low had it been?
It had been the height, I couldn't tell you. But the house that you've seen, it was just on top of the roof. It was hovering on top of the roof.
How big was it compared with the size of the house?
It swallowed the whole circumference of the roof. I couldn't see, the roof was completely blotted out. The chimneys I couldn't see. All I could see was this massive object that I described as like a Mexican hat without the bubbles.
And then it flew away sideways or upwards?
No, I didn't see. I just looked up and it had gone. But I assume it went straight up, because for a short while after in the sky I looked around and I said to my two boys, "Where, can you see anything? Can you see anything?" And they said, "There it is, Mum," and they pointed up, and I watched it. It was just like a little cotton reel in the sky, and it circled us 3 times. It went round 3 times, and then it just shut off, and that was it. When I started to analyse myself afterwards, I fear that I might have had an hallucination. But then I knew I hadn't had, because my sons were so sure about what they'd seen and what I'd seen. And it went through my mind that it was a secret weapon from Russia, and then I thought, well, it can't be that, because if they had something like that, they wouldn't need to fear anybody or anything.
Were you scared by it? Did you run indoors?
Oh, I was petrified. I couldn't move. I couldn't move a muscle. I was paralyzed with fear. But now I wouldn't be. Because now, when I look back, you know, I think, what an amazing thing to have happened, and for me to have seen it.
And when your husband came home, where were you?
Well, when my husband came home from the office, I was locked in the house with my children, under a big kitchen table that we were using.
Under the table?
Under the table, yes. It's funny now when I look back, you know, it sounds absolutely ridiculous, but this is the truth. This happened. And that's it. We were ridiculed. It was very embarrassing at the time, and people, they possibly thought, oh, she's a nutter. But, you know, who cares? This is something that's happened to me, and I'm a practically minded person, and that's it.
The illustration.
And the face is slim either side.
A lot slimmer.
Beautiful.
Would that be why the Gavin Gibbons, when he did the illustration, I think it was a UFO News or something, that was a lot thinner in the face?
Yeah, that's right.
Right.
Sorry about that, Jessie. I hadn't realised.
So we're Dawn's interrupting
That's
with a
right.
cup of tea. Come
When I
on then,
looked
Dawn.
at the saucer was no longer there, but a few minutes later we saw it circle the house 3 times before it shot upwards like a rocket against the blue of the dark in the sky.
Ah.
Quite true.
Yeah, thank you.
Jessie.